You open this door with the key of reason. Beyond it is another dimension. A dimension of truth. A dimension of freedom. A dimension of joy. You're moving into the land of both the ideal and the real, of the possible and the actual. You've just crossed over into the capitalist corner.
Where reason meets reality, welcome to the capitalist corner.
Well, they're having technical difficulties over on X, so hopefully nobody has an issue with joining the show. They're having technical difficulties over on X. The technical difficulties on X have been resolved. Well, welcome everybody to the program. Very pleased to have you with me today. We've got a lot of topics to discuss, and we can get right to them. Well, let's not get right to them. First, let's tell you to like, share, and subscribe the program. That would be very nice if you would do that. And also, we love super chats and super stickers. Check out our Patreon. I think that you know the rest. So I read an article this morning that got me thinking it would be a good topic for discussion. It was from the Epic Times. And it was about, well, let me just tell you the title. The title was K through 12 Reading Math Scores Lagging Behind Pre-Pandemic Levels Study Shows. So, but before really getting into what the studies show and all of that, I want to tell you a little bit about my own views. So first of all, you should know that I think COVID is real. I think it was a serious pandemic. I do not think it was just an ordinary flu. I think that the vaccines are not killing people. So I'm not some COVID, what you might describe as a crank. While I was incarcerated, I spoke out against the prison, how they were doing things. For instance, they went on the news and they touted how the inmates were putting them all at risk. I'm talking about the COs, the staff. They said they weren't being provided, gear and all that. Meanwhile, they would walk around with out face masks on. They would force us into small quarters, things of that nature. So, but from the very beginning, I was doing interviews on the Todd Feinberg show. And I didn't doubt the severity of it, but what my problem was is it seemed like all the focus was on health and only physical health and the possible consequences that could arise if, it was open and hospitals were overrun, that sort of thing. But there was ignoring or not taking seriously other things like the effects on the economy that shutting down the economy would have, the effects on social circles, the effects of mental health of kids and adults. Children not going to school, forced to social distance. These are young kids. Also, science takes time. It doesn't just happen like this, where you do a couple studies and everybody has the answers. Nevertheless, early on, there were a lot of the experts who were far more certain of their conclusions than were warranted. And they were, instead of telling the American people, listen, we don't really know a lot about this. We're still studying it. We're taking these measures as a precaution. They demonized the people that disagreed with them. They morally shamed people who didn't want to comply. So they were awful. And then there was the kickback from the other side, who came back and has been just as certain in stating things like COVID is just a cold, or, the vaccines are poison and the vaccines don't work. And there were the masks. You should never have had to wear masks, very, very certain. And all this was coming before the studies were out. $5 for my taxes from Jenna Kleem. Thank you so much, Jenna. So, in this article from the Epic Times, and I've also sent Persephone, of course, all these articles so she can correct me if I'm misstating anything or if I say anything wrong or if she just disagrees with my take. So, only a third of American K through 12 schools have returned to pre-coronavirus pandemic achievement levels in math or reading, an analysis group said this week. So a third are back up to par when it comes to math and reading. That is devastating in my view, that kids are so far behind on these things. Also, the NWEA lead research scientist said that while some schools recovered by avoiding initial declines, others rebounded with remarkable growth. I don't know why some of these have, rebounded so well, but some have, but the majority have not. The federal office, which is under the Department of Education, reported 69% of fourth graders and 70% of eighth graders aren't proficient in reading. In math, 61% of fourth graders, 72% of eighth graders were not proficient. School districts, that doesn't matter. Standardized tests for 600,000 students in every state will take place this year, so they will do some more studying. Also, I fact check this stuff to death on various, read various articles. The claims there are broadly correct. So absenteeism, long-term absenteeism, kids are still missing school as a result of this. So that is another issue. There are now lower college enrollment numbers, which is another, effect of these things. And we also have mental health problems. In a 2020 survey conducted by Yolo County, 36% of all students reported experiencing chronic sadness and hopelessness while at school. 40% in 2023, 40% reported persistent feelings of sadness or hopelessness in the past year. 20% of adolescents aged 12 through 17 reported having unmet mental health needs. So there's clearly problems that have resulted from these COVID policies. So, hello, Joseph. So I wanted to know, at the time, were there predictions? Were people saying that this is a mistake? And indeed, there were people who were saying it was a mistake to have these lockdowns. The Journal of American Medical Association Pediatric noted school closures are a blunt instrument associated with substantial harms to child development. Pediatricians warn that closures might not be worth it. Mental health and family burden concerns. That was from data coming out of Japan. So there were an abundance of warnings. Now, as I said, science is often, it takes time. So there's been a lot of claims that, I don't want to straw man anybody with claims like, well, there was never any evidence that children spread the virus or that children got sick. Okay. The evidence, it's true, from early on pointed in the direction that children weren't getting sick from the disease and weren't spreading it. Not all studies showed that, however. There were studies that showed, well, kids do actually get sick and kids actually do spread it, which is concerning. And you can't just say, well, we do have these studies over here that confirm that my position, so we're going to roll with that. When you're studying science, you have to take the approach, well, we just don't know, although this is the direction it's pointing at. That doesn't mean that you couldn't have said at the time we should not be closing schools. What it does mean is you don't take a cocksure approach, because what ends up happening, when you take a cocksure approach, there's people that don't share it, and when they come to find out that you're wrong, you lose credibility, which is what happened with the experts. They came off as so certain, they knew best, they knew it all, nobody else did. If you didn't agree, you were a douche. And then a lot of their claims come to be not true, and then people mistrust all the experts. Some people mistrust them, I should say. So while it's true that children don't spread, or it seems they don't spread it as much and they don't get as sick as other people, it wasn't always crystal clear that this was the case. Nevertheless, there are things that you can know ahead of time, and that's when you have to do cost-benefit assessments. So you do have a situation where you know if you take kids out of school, it's pretty reasonable that if you take kids out of school where they're getting their social interactions, forbid them from hanging around with other kids outside of school, you're isolating them. There's very little doubt that should come from this, that you are going to retard at least their social development. Persephone hates that I use the word retard their social development, but retard is actually a word, and I'm sorry, it means to slow, to hinder the development of. If somebody doesn't like it, I don't give a fuck, to be perfectly honest with you. Sorry. I'm not a person that runs around calling people names and shit like that, but it's a word, and that's what I'm talking about. So we know that it's going to do that, or at least you should know. It's also not unreasonable to think that if kids are out of school and they're doing this stuff on computer, their attention is not going to be focused on what they're doing. That is reasonable. It's also reasonable to assume they're going to be subject to the mental health concerns that they ended up happening. So as you're deciding to slow the economy, or rather shut things down, those things should have had higher weight. You don't just listen to medical experts who are trained to focus on illness. That is going to be their concern. So that's where they're going to focus. Why not bring in economists, bring in mental health experts, childhood mental health experts, childhood education experts, everybody, and really think about what you're doing here. Now, my personal approach as a non-expert, obviously, what I would have done if it were up to me is the federal government has no business in this. They have no business telling schools they have to close down, not close down. And yes, Donnie at the beginning was mocking people for not locking down and criticizing them. So Donnie was for the lockdowns at the beginning. So I wouldn't have had the federal government involved in that. I think the less government involvement, the better. I think that if you give people information, allow people to make their own choices, people can be trusted. And if people wanted to sequester themselves or keep away from other people, they could have. If they wanted to keep their kids home, they could have. If you had a entirely private school system, it would be up to the school whether they wanted to open or not. You wouldn't have the government mandating these kinds of things. So ultimately, that's my take on it. So we now know there have been lasting effects. Whether they're permanent, we still don't know, of course. But it's not a good sign that this has happened. And we ought to just mention that there were teachers' unions that were pushing for lockdowns. By no means all teachers' unions, and by no means all teachers, but there were teachers' unions that were pushing for lockdowns. Another problem with public sector unions, because these public sector unions are affecting the health of your children because of the decisions they're making. These public sector unions, who are not health experts, not mental health experts, they're there to protect the interest of the teachers, not the kids. And the kids ought to have been the fundamental concern of the education system. So that's my basic take on this. Akira Felix says homeschooling is better. The lockdowns turn kids into antisocial weirdos. Well, I don't know if they're antisocial weirdos or not. Teachers unions are like any other government bureaucrat. Fair enough. Okay, so let's pivot a little bit to fraud and deficits. Now, the other night, Deficit Don, Donald Trump, said that he's going to put J.D. Vance in charge of eliminating fraud, and he claimed that by doing this, we would fix the federal deficits. There would be no deficits if we could get rid of fraud. There's a great article in Cato from this morning, and we'll get into that in just a second. But I do want to look over some of the claims here. If I can just, I sent them to Persephone, so let me go there. So I looked at the national debt. First of all, I wanted to know what presidents minimized the national debt. So we should know. So the first thing is there have been 13 presidents that have had lower debt after taking office than before. They're Thomas Jefferson, James Monroe, John Quincy Adams, Andrew Jackson. He was the only one that actually eliminated it. John Tyler, Franklin Pierce, Andrew Johnson, Ulysses S. Grant, Rutherford B. Hayes, Chester Alan Arthur, Grover Cleveland, Warren Harding, and Calvin Coolidge. So Calvin Coolidge left office in 1928. Since 1928, every single president, including Deficit Don, has added to the debt. So I figured I would, I wanted to know what are the main drivers of the debt. So I looked into this. The main drivers of the U.S. national debt are structural imbalances between federal spending and revenue accelerated by an aging population, rising healthcare costs, and high interest payments on accumulated debt. Mandatory programs like Social Security and Medicare, along with surging interest expenses, payments on the debt, are the main drivers. Notice that fraud is not listed there as one of the main drivers of the debt. So I actually said, well, let me actually look into how much of the debt fraud contributes to. So the highest estimates are that $521 billion annually goes to fraud. That's a tremendous amount. That should be eliminated, right? Let's get rid of that. We need to get rid of fraud. But when there's a $1.775 trillion deficit, and only $500 billion or so is due to fraud, obviously fraud is not the main driver of the debt. I did not see the story, Ian, I'm sorry. So if fraud is not the main driver of the debt, then what is Trump talking about? Well, of course, Trump is speaking out of his rather large rear end. So that's what's happening there. Let me see if I can make sure we get it here. Okay. First of all, I don't believe for 1 second they're going to eliminate the fraud. That's the first thing. But even if they did, it wouldn't, at current levels, $551 billion in fraud, 1.7 trillion in annual deficits. You're not getting rid of it. You're making a slight dent at best. So, but the Government Accountability Office actually says that it's between 230 and 521 billion annually in fraud. So 551 is the high end. So now there's this idea. So Trump, one of the things he wants to do, or has said he wants to do, let's just look at his claims that he's going to eliminate the debt, right? One of the things he said he wants to do is replace the income tax with tariffs. First of all, he's not doing that. That's not going to happen. But even if it did, so tariff revenue for fiscal year 2025 was $264 billion, which is just 10% of the revenue that the income tax brought in. So you are going to be bringing in a tenth of the money into the revenue that you're currently bringing, or you're bringing in more, not a tenth that you would be with just the income tax would be the better way to put it. But you're not cutting spending because Trump has said he wants to protect Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, and the fraud isn't going to eliminate it enough. So you're going to end up with bigger deficits if you do that. Also, he wants to have these new federal retirement plans with $1,000 matching contributions. There's more government spending. He says America has no choice but to approve trillion-dollar defense budgets, and he wants to add, increase that to $1.5 trillion. So the bottom line here is you can't eliminate the deficit by finding fraud. And Trump seems to have no interest in cutting spending. Quite the contrary, he wants to increase spending. Now, people, like I had a guy tell me one time, they've been complaining about the debt since I was a kid, and it's not a problem. So, okay, well, is that true that it's not a problem? Now, we may not have had a fiscal crisis like Greece had. I don't know. I think it was, I want to say 2008, but I'm not positive. A fiscal crisis like Greece had. We may not have those kind of problems yet. They still could happen. But if you have to pay the debt, you have to pay at least the interest on the debt, which is a very high amount. How do you do that? How are you paying that? Well, you can do it through taxes or printing. Both taxes and printing are counterproductive. What I mean by that is they curb production. If you print money, then you are going to create structural imbalances within the economy. You're going to have higher prices. Ultimately, you will have the boom-bust cycle that we are all accustomed to. Taxing takes money out of the productive sector of the economy from the people who actually earn it, and you're paying it to the people from whom you borrowed. Ian Gilmore says there's an argument to be made that if the debt grows slower than the GDP, things are okay, but we are not even in that situation. I've heard that, but you still have to pay the debt. You still have to pay interest on the debt no matter what. And the only way you can do that is from taxing or from printing, or, I suppose you could always borrow more, but then you have to pay more. No, Jim, you were right. People do not connect spending to inflation or interest rates. They ought to. Okay. So I'm going to detour a little bit about something, because I posted this morning about truth and how truth is important to me. And this is something that I want to really hammer, because we've lost a hold of the idea of truth in our discourse. People now just lie. It reminds me when people will frequently say that they don't take Trump literally. You're just taking him literally. You can't take him literally. This reminds me of debates that I used to have in prison with Christians, Muslims, the religious folk. And I would point to the text, whether it be the Bible, the Quran, whatever, and say, look, this is what the text says. They would then say to me, but you got to understand, it's metaphorical. You can't take it literally. Okay. Once you do that with the text, and you just say you can't take it literally, well, then it's purely a matter of interpretation. And each person gets to say, this is how I'm interpreting it. And my interpretation is correct, and your interpretation is wrong. And that's it. I actually saw two guys argue one time. And one guy said, I know I'm right because the Holy Spirit is telling me I'm right. And the other guy says, well, the Holy Spirit is telling me I'm right. And then I'm thinking, well, there's two guys that ought to be dragged off to the loony bin because they think that a spirit is talking to them. But I digress. My point is that once you open the door to that it's all just metaphor. It's all just metaphorical. Then people can ascribe whatever meaning they want. So in the case of Trump, when he lies, which he frequently does, they just say, no, but that's not what he meant. He meant this. And it's always their preferred interpretation, right? They interpret it however they want. And then, well, it's okay. And that's why I can still like him. I don't actually have to analyze what he says. They, of course, will often, the pivot usually goes like this. This is the discussion. Donald Trump is a great president. He's wonderful. And then you point out his horrible character, and they say, well, I don't care about his character. Then you point out all the lies he tells, and they'll either say, well, those aren't lies. You have to take them metaphorically, or they'll say they don't care about the lies. Then they go to, I like the policy. It's the policy and the effects of the policy. Then you can point to how bad it is, that his policies, and that the effects aren't actually good. And then it ultimately ends up to, yeah, what are you going to vote for Biden? You're going to vote for Kamala? So evidently we can never criticize any president any longer as long as somebody can claim that the other person would have been worse. So we should just accept a lying demagogue who has bad policies for the country under the claim that, well, it could have always been worse. That's just not how I live my life. It's not how I analyze politicians, and I'm not going to start doing it now. So why am I bringing this up about this whole truth thing and interpretation of Trump? Because the claim that he's going to eliminate deficits by finding fraud. You're not going to get rid of all the fraud, first of all. Not going to happen. Just like Doge wasn't going to make all these extravagant cuts that they were claiming at the time. They're not going to eliminate all the fraud. Joe Biden's not going to cure cancer. It's just these things are not going to happen. And even if you did, it wouldn't fix the debt. But what happens? So when Trump makes this prediction and it doesn't happen, people will say, yeah, but still finding fraud is a good thing. Yeah, of course it is. Then just say we want to eliminate the fraud. Why do you have to make up stories about what it's going to do? Why not just say, I'm going to work to resolve the Ukraine-Russia thing rather than saying I can resolve it in one day. I'm the genius. Why the lies? And why doesn't it matter to people? Fuck if I know. But it matters to me because truth matters to me. Reality matters to me. And I hope it matters to all of you as well. All right, so what's the problem with smart people, Akira? Akira Felix says the problem is with smart people. The objectivists, intellectuals, libertarians, and constitutionalists who support them are the ones that worried me. Well, they worry me too, to be quite frank with you. That's a subject for a different day. I will say that there's progress made. It looks like I will be debating Andy Bernstein in March on the subject of Donald Trump. The details need to be hashed out, but it appears this is going to happen. I'm very hopeful. It will undoubtedly be a cordial debate, and I'm very confident that I will win it. So I read this article today from the Foundation of Economic Education. And the article was called, let me make sure that I find it and get it right. The Lure of the European Model. And it was all about how the European model is very, very bad. So I took that article and I thought, wow, this is going to be a good topic, this European model and how it's so disastrous and everything else. And I submitted it to, I don't know which one of the LLMs for fact checking. And importantly, when you do this, just so everybody knows, if you haven't done it, it's not just the LLM says, no, this isn't true or this is true. The LLM cites sources. And it turned out that the guy was bad on his facts, at least according to the AI. Now, could the AI have been wrong? Of course. That, however, would have involved me into a deep dive of trying to sift through who's correct, the LLM or this guy, rather than focusing on the story, which is what I was interested in. So it occurred to me that there was some great stuff by Johan Norberg on the Swedish model. Now, we constantly are hearing the far left Democrats and their defenders talk about how America needs to be more like Sweden. If socialism's so bad, how come it works in Sweden? Why does, why is it so great in Sweden when they are a socialist country, a democratic socialist country? So I remembered Johan Norberg. I read an article from him about 10 years ago now in Reason Magazine. So I Googled him, and lo and behold, I took his claims and injected them into the LLM and fact-checked. And he was right about virtually everything. All the facts that he was claiming turned out to be, according to the LLM, correct. He also cites sources. I've looked into him before. I've read on his stuff, so I'm very confident in the accuracy of his claims. So a quick summary here. Johan Norberg argues that Sweden is not a socialist, but rather a robust free market capitalist economy with a high tax welfare state. He highlights Sweden's prosperity stemmed from the 19th century liberal reforms, not socialism. In post-1990 reforms, privatization, school vouchers rescued it. He touts their pro-market features. There's no minimum wage there. Property rights are more secure. There is the money is more sound. There are school choice. The income tax is not as progressive. While it is higher than it is in America, it is not as progressive as what is in America, meaning that the top earners don't pay way more than the bottom earners. The welfare state over there is financed. Now my phone is not working at all. Is financed by, yes, easier to start a business. There's not all the licensing requirements that you have over here in the United States. There's far more free market stuff than there is than what people are talking about when they say that Sweden is a socialist country. So now one of the things he points out is that between 1870 and 1970, Sweden grew faster than any other developed country but Japan. Their GDP growth per capita was second only to Japan, and according to whichever LLM this was, this claim is well supported by the historical economic literature and is accurate. He also says that from 1970 through 90, this is when the government was massively expanded, taxes were raised, and the economy was regulated. Not a single net job was created in the private sector. Also fact-checked, true. Multiple academic sources confirm this. So if Sweden was basically a free market economy that grew rapidly, and then Sweden adopted socialism and tanked, and then went back more towards a free market economy, why do people constantly like to claim that it's socialist, that it's democratic socialist? Now, look, it's a welfare state, and that obviously I disapprove of. I don't like that, but let's analyze things as they are. And we can then, if you want to argue, well, the welfare state is responsible for the good things and the free market's responsible for the bad things, you can make that claim, and then we can argue it out. We can use economic analysis, moral analysis, historical analysis, and really delve into the thing. But why claim it's socialism unless you have a preconceived attachment to socialism that is not attached to facts, that you just like the idea, and so you're looking for examples or trying to fabricate examples to confirm your view? I can't think of any other reason. I don't know, unless you're just misinformed. But either way, it's not good. There's also the fact that Sweden is a high trust society. Years ago, the economist Milton Friedman was asked about the low poverty in Sweden, and he said, well, from what I understand, the Swedes have a rather low poverty rate in the United States as well. The point being is that cultural factors do matter, and the culture of Swedes, the Swedes, for instance, don't think people should be taking money they don't deserve. That's very high on their value scale, is not doing that. It used to be much higher. It's getting worse now, but whatever. The point is that the Swedes, that's one of their values, and it's a high trust society, so it's easier to do business within those communities. So that's another thing that explains the Swedish wealth. The bottom line is Sweden is not a socialist country. It's a welfare state, mixed economy that historically has done much, much better the freer it is. That's just the facts. So with that, I'm not seeing any questions from the, well, maybe there are that I've missed. Let me look into them. Don't give me the dirty look, Persephone, please. These are comments in here, not questions that I'm seeing. Well, here's a good quote from Jim Valiant referring to the COVID stuff. Jim says, if the choice is between living any life, whatever, lockdowns versus health, safety, then my safety must be left up to me. Anyone could voluntarily stay at home or wear a hazmat suit if they chose to. Jim Valiant is, of course, right again. So now we'll bring on Persephone. Persephone.
Good morning.
Good morning. You, can I tell you that since I've switched over to the delving into a few topics but going far deeper, I'm far busier than what I was before. It takes a lot more time, and I really have to do a lot more thinking about the order of presentation, the logical progression of the arguments that I'm making. It's a much more difficult thing, and I also have to send all this stuff out. There's more to read. It's tough. I think it's worth it, though. I do think that the discussions are getting better on the show, and I think that we're able to tackle things in more depth and to understand principles better. So the first thing I wanted to ask you before we get into the stories is, do you think that that's true? Do you like it better this way or the other way, or maybe somewhere in between?
I think it's better that you tackle a few 3 stories maximum, but I also think it's easier when you have Mark or James here that you can bounce off from the beginning, because otherwise you go through everything within half an hour.
Yes, well, 36 minutes. But yeah, if I have somebody else on here, then they're taking up the other 36 minutes, and then we're actually 12 minutes over in that point.
Yes. But I can understand why it would take longer, because you're not just looking at the articles that you see. You're looking at like one article and then doing a deep dive and then seeing something else and then doing a deep dive on that and then sending screenshots and Grok conversations, ChatGPT, and more articles.
I had a big argument, by the way, with ChatGPT this morning.
Why?
Well, so you remember our discussion that we had yesterday about ghostwriting? So I do like I always do. I want to get feedback, and some of the feedback's good, but then it keeps making this point. It's saying you're simplifying, you're overly simplifying the point. It says because you're not you're just saying all ghostwriting is bad, and you're not allowing for situations, you're not allowing for the people to decide whether it matters to them or not. And I'm like, no, that's inaccurate. We've been over this over and over again, that if the people reading it are aware, then it's fine. And then it would say, okay, yes, I agree, but, and finally I told that, I said, look, you're either uninformed or dishonest. I don't know which one. And then it responds and says, I'm neither uninformed nor dishonest, it tells me. But, and then the other thing was, it was largely analyzing the discussion. And this, I find interesting. And this, of course, digresses from what we're talking about, but I like the topic. Because when it comes to up and down facts, this is true, this is true, this is not, this is not. It'll tell you, and then you can go to the source and say it. But when it comes to interpretation, a lot of it is based on cultural norms, things like that. And it was analyzing the moral discussion that we had, but from the popular ethics that's out there, like the ethics within the publishing. It's like just because you think this doesn't mean that it's not widely accepted. And I'm like, yeah, I don't care if it's widely accepted. It's not relevant to the claim, right? But nevertheless, it shows that the common view of ethics is far more pragmatic and far more majority driven, even though it then said it was not. Thank you, Rock, for the $2. Highly, highly appreciated. I will not give up, although I cannot promise not to get discouraged because that's out of my control. That is an emotional reaction that comes, but doesn't mean I will give up. But thank you for the $2, sir. So yeah, that's my take. Is that it was very. It analyzed us very much, and then even after I told it that we were discussing this from an objectivist perspective, it still was making the same kind of mistakes. It was saying, "But you guys didn't address this." I said, "Yes, it did," and then it accused me of making an ad hominem attack when we were, because I wasn't saying you were wrong. I said, I think you're motivated by this because we were having a discussion. But so there was a lot of interesting things. It was fun.
I did the same thing, not with ChatGPT, but with Claude. And he also said, when you said to me that I stand to benefit immensely, he also said, this is ad hominem. Your financial interest doesn't determine whether ghostwriting is ethical.
Yeah, but I didn't say it did. And I didn't imply it did.
But it's really funny that both of them did like the same thing. That is quite funny.
The dogs were barking. So yeah, no, it is. I think it's because that no matter how smart these get, is they can't assess the nuance of discussion. Because that wasn't relevant to the truth or falsity of the claims, or it wasn't relevant to the thing. It was relevant because we're doing a show whereby we want to help people to grow, right? We want to help people to learn. And one of the things that when you're doing moral reasoning, is to recognize your own biases and how they might be playing a part.
Do you want to hear the insanely funny thing mine did? It's not funny. So yeah. Mine said that there was a logical inconsistency, and tell me if you can tell me why this wasn't a logical inconsistency. Michael's position is that ghostwriting is unethical because it's deceptive, but his exception is that presidential speechwriting is fine because it's disclosed. This is inconsistent because if disclosure makes ghostwriting ethical, then the problem is disclosure, not ghostwriting. And I'm like, yeah, that was the whole discussion that we had.
No, it's not, because the entire point is about deception, and if you're disclosing, you're not deceiving. So Rock wants to argue with me now. We can do this. Rock says, in his view, emotions are a choice. I either choose to get discouraged or choose to keep pushing happily and feel thankful for the challenge. Rock, I'm sorry, my brother. There is an overwhelming amount of evidence that emotions are not a choice. Not in the short term. In the long term, yes, you can cultivate your own values, and your values ultimately determine your emotions. But to think that you can just choose an emotion in a given moment, no, that's just not accurate. It's not true. I mean, I could present, I don't know how much evidence you want or what sources you would accept, but from both introspection, discussions, and a ton of reading on the subject, no. I've never even seen anybody claim that in scientific literature.
A lot of people do, and I think that there's a reason that they say it, and the reason is because you can choose whether to act on an emotion, you can choose whether or not to let an emotion drive your behavior, but you cannot choose whether to feel something. You can only choose whether to accept that emotion as valid.
Yes.
Or to say, I'm feeling defeated, but logically I know I shouldn't, but you can't stop the actual feeling.
No, and not while you're feeling it. Over the long term, you can shape your emotions, sure. Jim says repression is real too. Well, right. I mean, you can just shut down an emotion and push it down. That's not the same thing as choosing your emotions, though, because then that repressed emotion is going to cause damage and ultimately manifest itself in other ways. But thanks for the point, Jim. Appreciate it. All right, so what do you think, Persephone? I'm interested to get your take on the stories today, specifically, more than any of them, because you're a foreigner. I want your take. I don't know how much you agree. You agree, because I'm reading Jim Valiant. How much you know about Sweden, but what do you think about the people who say Sweden is socialist?
So that one article made the point that they're stuck in the past. They're looking at a past version of Sweden, and I think that makes sense. And I think that they see what they want to see. Like you said, they are looking for confirmation of their own preconceived ideas, and they're not really. It's difficult to know all of the intricacies of a country when you're not actually living in it. So from the outside, if you're only seeing part of what's going on, then I guess maybe it is easy to say, like, oh, well, they've got some socialist policies, but they're not living there. They're not immersed in the country. So I can understand why they would maybe think that Sweden is more socialist than it is. And maybe because the things that get spoken about are the more socialist things. Those are the things that get passed around on TikTok and on Facebook, like, oh, well, look at this, blah, blah, blah. And the other things aren't spoken about as much, or are spoken about in different circles. So I get it.
Yes, that's true. A good point, Persephone, and good point, Akira. They also say China is communist. They want to use them as example to push for government force. That's pretty much it. Good point. Rock, are socialists in America reasonably discouraged, or do they choose it despite being spoiled? I don't know. I don't know if this is referring to your previous comment. I'm not sure. But the reasonably discouraged is irrelevant. The point is that if you feel discouraged, it doesn't matter if it's a reasonable feeling to have or not. But you cannot just control the emotion in the moment. It just doesn't work that way.
And I think
And why they choose socialism, I think there are people who, and I get into arguments with these folks sometimes, because they'll say things like, people are socialist only because of their ethics. It's not because they accept bad economics. But that might be true for a lot of them, maybe even the bulk of them. But you simply can't claim was peremptorily that, or anti hoc, that everybody that's a socialist it's because of their moral positions, right? There are people who think that socialist economics work. And by work I mean that socialist economics will produce good results for the bulk of the people. And you have to address that. And just saying that they're either immoral or dishonest, first of all, it's not true. It's not a rationalistic truth that to be a socialist is to be dishonest and immoral. That's not true. And it's also just counterproductive. I mean, there are instances where you could clearly see that these people are unethical, like the American Communist Party. These are just lying scumbags. I have no problem saying that, but it's not true of all socialists everywhere and at all times. Now, if you're talking about a socialist professor, okay, well then we've got to, delve into, perhaps, he's likely being dishonest, or he has really skewed morals. But if you're talking about a 22-year-old kid, big difference.
So I will say that if you do look at some of the younger socialists, there is a strong sense that they are just very misguided. They care very deeply. They truly believe that socialism is the answer, and a lot of them are very discouraged, reasonably. So, I mean, to say, I feel like that comment's a little bit shitty, because they're wrong, but I mean, a lot of them just really don't know better. A lot of them. Some
They
of
should have
them.
known better. You know what we're going to need, Persephone? We need you to think of a good super chat goal for both here and everyday ethics. By the way, have I not been doing well?
Oh, that's true. You have. But I mean, also, I feel like it's not fair because I'm so difficult to be mean to, because I'm so nice and
Okay,
wonderful.
you make all kinds of faces at me, both while you're down there and up here.
Well, I mean, we'll see what happens when Mark gets back.
He's Mark, the wonderful Mark Pellegrino, by the way, is back mañana. He will be here tomorrow. I cannot wait to overload him with things to read in the morning. I think that'll be great and a lot of fun.
Yeah, I'm sure he'll absolutely love it. I got 17 texts this morning. Well, no, not this morning. It was at 5 o'clock in the evening for me. It's like middle of the
So
day for
Rock
me.
has a question, and it's good because it'll keep us here a little. He says, "Can you not just look for the good in situations, a silver lining to stay positive? Are you forced to be discouraged? You're not. No, Rock. That's not. But that's not the same thing as what you said earlier. Yes, you can train yourself to look for the good in situations, and by the what you choose to think, once you've trained yourself to do that, it will necessarily impact the way you feel. That's entirely what cognitive behavioral therapy is, not just to look for good in situations, but to alter the way you think so it alters the way you feel. But that's not the same thing as I feel discouraged and therefore I can just choose not to. That I can talk myself out of it. You know, if I say to myself, for instance, you know what, there's a lot of good in the world, there's a lot of positive aspects, then the feeling will start to subside. But that is not the same thing as choosing my emotion. That's choosing to alter my thinking, and once my thinking alters, the emotion follows.
But also, I feel like you're saying you're equating being discouraged with giving up and choosing to not continue. Like feeling discouraged, feeling down, feeling a little bit hopeless, that doesn't mean that you're not like going to continue anyway. Because that's sort of what happened yesterday, you know?
Right, you're right.
Very, very bleak, very hopeless. And then you sit and you think and you say, okay, there's no reason to feel hopeless. I'm going to
no.
continue.
I also, by the way, I don't think it's healthy either to ignore the bad. You
Mm-mm.
know, to just say, no, there's a lot of good and let's just focus on that. That's not intellectually healthy at all. It is true when there is good and there is bad, you get to choose which to focus on and where to focus your energy. But to ignore when the president of the United States gives a speech like he did the other night, and then you see the follow up and all the lies and the praise that come along with it, and that the only real opposition is what's the word I'm looking for here? Feckless, dishonest, and just bad. That ought to be depressing. It doesn't mean you have to crawl into a hole, but it ought to say, damn, that really sucks. And then you can follow it up with, okay, what can I do about it? How can I fix this? What can I do better? But it's still not. I'm never gonna. I don't want to just ignore the bad in this world.
We call that slapping a smiley face band-aid on a bullet wound. You
Who's
can't.
we?
South Africa.
Slapping a smiley face bandage on a bullet wound. I love that.
But
All
that's
right.
because that's what you're doing though. If you're saying that no matter what happens, I'm never going to be angry, I'm never going to be sad, I'm never going to I'm never going to like accept any negative emotion, that's what you're doing. You're slapping a smiley face bandage on a bullet wound and hoping that you're not going to bleed to death, which you are.
Nice. Oh, did you have any comments on the answers to the question from yesterday?
I looked at those.
Okay.
I no, I didn't. I
You
didn't look.
didn't?
I don't even remember what the question was yesterday.
Oh, my. Well, there were only two comments, and I think it was about being discouraged was your question. And
Oh
Megan,
yes,
Megan
feeling.
Ribbons, Megan says it took me a long time to realize that the reason I'm so discouraged by the culture is because my vision of what the culture can and ought to be is so clear. The contrast between the zeitgeist and my vision is glaring. Can you spend a little time each episode painting that vision for us? I wish I would have read that ahead of time.
Ah, imagine. Oh yes, I did actually read these because I liked Megan's comment, and the other comment is it takes only one person to change the world. Take someone like Epstein is a
Alex
perfect
Epstein,
example. His
he's a,
influence in the administration is clear.
his influence is clear. I don't know that he's changed the world. I want to be careful of hyperbole. I'm a big fan of his work. I think he's great, brilliant guy. And I think it is a testament to what a person can do.
Yes, I don't think that he said Alex Epstein changed the world. He said it takes one person to change the
Oh,
world.
okay. I got you.
Alex
Okay.
Epstein had a clear effect on the administration.
Okay. Well, let's give the capitalist thought of the day, and in the meantime, Persephone can think of a question. Okay. The capacity of a given human being, most human beings with intact brains, intact faculties, is absolutely amazing. Human beings are capable of living out an astonishing ethical vision that should produce wonder in all of us. And most people are capable of that. Then there's, very bright human beings who are just capable of and creative of creating wonderful works of art, works of fiction, intellectual achievements. If one individual is capable of living this way, then most of us are capable of living this way. And if we do choose to piggyback on Rock Chartrand to live this way, we can create the world that we want to live in. We can create the kind of culture that we want to live in. It takes time, it takes effort, but we can do it. The only way we can do it is if on an individual level, we first choose to live it. We choose to be supporters and lovers of life. We choose to be rational beings, and we choose to have an optimistic look on the world until that optimism is simply no longer warranted. I firmly believe that the optimism is still warranted, no matter how bleak things currently look. And with that, I will turn it over to my wonderful co-host, Persephone, so that she can ask the question.
Okay. When you are discouraged or you are sad or feeling hopeless, what do you do? Who do you look to inspire yourself or to make yourself feel better? What do you do? Who do you look to give yourself hope again?
Who do you
Yep.
look to give yourself hope again when you're feeling down? Is that the question?
What do you do or who do you look to? Because I can understand maybe you don't look to a specific person, maybe you do, or maybe you do an activity, maybe you do whatever. What do you do or who do you look to?
What do you do to lift your spirits?
Yes.
How's that? All right. Persephone, thank you so much for your wonderful insight and analysis. Really appreciate it. Thank you for the super chat, super stickers, and all your wonderful comments and questions. We will see you back here tomorrow, and Mark will be with me. So we will all have to give him a big round of applause when we see his mustache. That'll be great. I hope that wasn't mean. I don't think it was mean. I don't
It
think
was.
it was mean.
It was.
I
It
don't think
was.
so.
Audience, vote in the
Come on,
comments
no,
if
because
you think
no.
that was mean of
I
Michael.
didn't insult the mustache. I didn't insult him. I just said give him a round of applause when you see the mustache. It is a very pronounced feature.
Audience, vote in the YouTube comments if you think that what Michael said
Also, wait a second,
qualified as
hold on.
mean.
But also, isn't it that I have to be mean to somebody?
We never clarified that.
I think we need to, because otherwise me saying that Donald Trump is a liar and that'd be mean.
That's true though. If it's true, it's not
And
mean.
it's true that Mark has a pronounced mustache.
Fuck.
Okay. Porn stash would have been mean, Jim says. Okay. All I said was mustache. We will see you back here tomorrow. Until then, please check your premises. Peace.